The gift my son gave me for my retirement party in front of all his important friends was a telephone. Not a sleek modern smartphone, but a large white plastic thing with buttons the size of quarters. The laughter in the room was immediate and loud. They thought it was a charming joke, a gentle ribbing of a sweet, out-of-touch old woman. They did not know they were laughing at a woman who the next morning would make a phone call that would liquidate $5 million of their inheritance. My name is Clara Thompson. I am 70 years old. For 40 of those years, I was a high school English teacher, a woman who believed in the power of words and the structure of a well-told story. My husband, Arthur, was a quiet, brilliant investor who saw the world in numbers. He left me financially secure, a secret I kept to myself, preferring the quiet comfort of my modest life. And until 10 minutes ago, I was a mother watching what I thought was a celebration in my honor. The party, of course, wasn't my idea. My son David and his wife Jennifer had insisted. A celebration of you, Mom, David had said, his voice full of a practiced enthusiasm. A chance for all our friends to finally honor you properly. I had resisted, but they were persistent. So I had played my part. I had allowed them to create a comfortable, fictional version of me, a simple, sweet old woman who knew her place. It's a strange performance, isn't it? Playing a smaller version of yourself just to make the people you love more comfortable. As I share my story, I find myself wondering where you are in the world listening. It would bring me a bit of comfort to know where my voice has landed today. If you have a moment, please leave a comment and consider subscribing to Granny's Stories to hear the rest of my tale. So I played my part. I arrived at their sprawling minimalist house and smiled as David gave a toast full of funny anecdotes that were really just thinly veiled insults about my old-fashioned ways. And then he brought out the gift. The giant button telephone. Have you ever been the punchline of a joke that everyone else found funny, but that felt to you like a small, sharp knife? They handed me the phone, a symbol of the gentle incompetence they had assigned to me, and they laughed. And in that moment, under the warm lights of my son's expensive home, something inside me went cold and quiet. They thought they were giving me a gag gift. They had no idea they were actually giving me a weapon. Because that phone with its ridiculously large buttons was all I needed to make one very simple, very clear phone call in the morning. A call to my broker. The drive home was a study in silence. My son David tried to fill it with cheerful, meaningless chatter about the success of the party, about how much his colleagues had enjoyed themselves. His wife, Jennifer, said nothing at all, just stared out the passenger window, as if the passing streetlights were the most interesting things in the world. I did not participate in the charade. I sat in the back seat of their expensive sterile car, the ridiculous giant button phone in my handbag like a cold, heavy stone, and I simply observed. I was no longer a mother being driven home by her son. I was an analyst collecting the final pieces of data before making a major course correction. They dropped me at my door with relieved goodbyes. I did not invite them in for tea. That night, I did not sleep. But it was not a night of grief-stricken tossing and turning. It was the most focused, productive night I have had in 20 years. I went to my late husband's study, a room I had mostly kept as a quiet sanctuary of memory, and I turned on the desk lamp. I pulled out the files. The thick, neatly labeled folders containing the financial life Arthur had built for us, and the one he had so carefully taught me how to manage after he was gone. For years, I had allowed that knowledge to lie dormant content, to live a simple life, allowing my son to believe I was nothing more than a retired school teacher with a modest pension. It was easier that way. It kept me from intimidating him. It kept the peace. But the peace had been a lie, and the time for being small was over. I spent the night with my husband's ledgers and my own clear, cold thoughts. I was not planning a revenge. I was drafting a new business plan for the rest of my life. The next morning at 9 a.m. sharp, I made the call. My broker, Robert Harrison, a man who had managed my portfolio for 15 years, answered with his usual warmth. "Clara, good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "Everything is excellent, Robert." I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'd like to make some adjustments to the portfolio today. Please begin liquidating the tech stocks, all of them." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Clara," he said, his voice cautious, "that's a significant position. Over $5 million. Are you sure you want to move that aggressively, without discussion?" "Perfectly sure," I replied. "I am also meeting with my lawyer this afternoon to make some significant changes to my will. I'll be establishing a new charitable foundation in my husband's name. The liquidated funds will provide the initial endowment." Have you ever had to make a decision so clean and so final that you could feel the entire landscape of your future shifting right under your feet? Robert, to his credit, understood. His voice shifted from concerned friend to efficient professional. "I see," he said. "I'll get started immediately, Clara. The market is favorable today." I hung up the phone. The order had been placed. In a few hours, a substantial portion of my son's presumed inheritance would be transformed from a comfortable private safety net into a very public, very permanent legacy for his father, a legacy he would now have no part in. They thought my world was small, just this quiet house and my old books. They had no idea I had the power to build institutions. My son had given me a joke gift to symbolize my irrelevance and my dependence. I had decided to respond by rewriting his entire future. It seemed like a fair trade. My appointment with Arthur Jennings, my late husband's lawyer and a man I've known for 40 years, was for 2 o'clock. I dressed for it like I was preparing for a board meeting, not a family reckoning. I wore a simple gray wool suit, my mother's pearls, and a cool, settled composure that I had not felt in years. The drive to his downtown office was quiet. I did not listen to the radio. I listened to the silence, to the new hard certainty that had taken root in my heart. I was not a grieving mother anymore. I was a client with a clear set of instructions. Arthur's office is a place of quiet, old-world dignity, filled with the scent of leather-bound books and lemon polish. He greeted me with the gentle concern of an old friend, but I did not come for comfort. I came for a contract. I sat across from his large oak desk, the same desk where my husband and I had signed our first wills so many years ago, and I got straight to the point. "Arthur," I said, "I'm here to change my will." Substantially. He listened without interruption as I laid out my new vision for the future. My future, not theirs. I told him about the charitable foundation I was establishing in my husband's name to be endowed with the $5 million from the liquidated stocks. I told him to establish a separate ironclad trust for my grandchildren's education, one that their parents could never touch. And then I told him the part that made him finally put down his pen and look at me over the rim of his glasses. I instructed him to change the inheritance for my son David and his wife Jennifer to a single symbolic sum, $1 each. He was quiet for a long moment. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle. "You know that, as your lawyer, I must ask. Is this a decision you have made with a completely clear head? Are you feeling pressured or distraught? Have you ever felt more clear-headed than in the moment you finally decide to stop accepting disrespect? It's a strange kind of clarity, isn't it? Born from the ashes of a long-held illusion. I have never been more clear-headed in my life, Arthur." I replied, my voice steady. I briefly told him about the party, about the telephone with the giant buttons. I didn't tell it with emotion. I told it as a statement of fact, an exhibit in the case for my own sanity. He listened, and the look of professional concern on his face slowly hardened into one of quiet, grim understanding. He picked up his pen again. "Very well," he said. "Let's get to work." I walked out of his office an hour later, with the wheels of my new life officially in motion. The legal gears were turning silently and irrevocably. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from David. He would have just received the automated alert from the brokerage firm about the massive stock sale. The message was not angry, not yet. It was confused, a flicker of nervous static. It read, "Mom just got an alert from Harrison's office about a major transaction. Is everything okay? Please call me." I looked at the message on my phone. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He was asking if his inheritance was okay. He was worried about the numbers, not about me. I put the phone in my purse without replying. He wanted to know what was going on. He was about to find out. The first tremors of the quiet, orderly earthquake I had started were just beginning to reach his perfect, polished world. I did not have to wait long for the aftershocks. My phone, which had been so quiet for so long, began to buzz with a frantic, desperate energy. The texts from my son David were a cascade of escalating panic. They moved from confusion, "Mom, what's going on?" to financial anxiety. "The market is down. Why would you sell the entire portfolio now?" And finally, to outright accusation. "Are you trying to ruin us? This is our future you're playing with." I read his words, and I noted with the dispassionate clarity of a teacher grading a poorly written essay that not a single message asked if I was all right. His concern was not for my well-being, but for the well-being of his inheritance. I did not reply. I let the silence answer for me. I had spent a lifetime responding to his every need. My silence now was a foreign and terrifying language to him, and he did not know how to interpret it. When his frantic texts failed, they sent in a different negotiator. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer, appeared at my front door the next afternoon unannounced. She was not there for a social call. She was there to close a deal. She came armed not with an apology, but with a tablet computer, her face set in a look of patient, professional concern, as if she were a financial advisor about to explain a complex investment to a particularly slow-witted client. She sat in my living room and showed me charts. She spoke of tax implications of long-term capital gains, of the financial recklessness of my emotional decision. She treated my choice not as an act of self-preservation, but as a temporary hysterical mistake that she, the cooler head, had come to correct. When her logical, condescending arguments failed to move me, she deployed her final weapon, a veiled threat, wrapped in the language of love. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we're just worried you're not, well, We might have to look into options to protect you from making any more rash decisions. It's a chilling thing to realize someone in your family sees you not as a person, but as a financial asset that needs to be managed. Have you ever felt like you were being valued only for what you have instead of for who you are? I looked at her, this beautiful, ambitious woman who was so blinded by the language of money that she could no longer see the human being sitting in front of her. I did not get angry. I simply told her that my financial and legal affairs were now being handled by competent professionals, and that any further inquiries should be directed to them. Jennifer left my house that day, her face a mask of pure frustration. She had come to reason with what she thought was a sentimental, slightly senile old woman. She had found instead a closed and locked door. She and David were so focused on the money I was taking away, they had never once stopped to ask about the dignity they had already stolen. They thought this was a financial negotiation. They still didn't understand. This was a quiet revolution, and I was not taking prisoners. After Jennifer's failed visit, the phone went silent. The barrage of angry texts and panicked calls stopped. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the heavy, waiting silence that follows a storm when everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see what the lightning has struck. They had tried anger. They had tried manipulation. Now, having exhausted all their strategies, they had retreated, leaving me in a quiet truce I knew was only temporary. I used that quiet not to reconsider my position, but to fortify it. In the midst of that silence, a different kind of message arrived. It was not a demand or an accusation. It was a simple handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. It was from my granddaughter, Lucy. Her handwriting was still the careful looping cursive of a girl trying to be a woman. "Grandma," it read, "I don't know what is happening, but the house is quiet and sad. Mom and Dad don't talk much. I miss you. I hope you are okay." Her words were a small, clean light in a very dark room. They reminded me of what I was fighting for. It was not just about protecting myself from my son's entitlement. It was about protecting her from inheriting it. The day I was scheduled to sign the new will, I woke with a sense of calm purpose. I dressed in a simple dark green dress the color of old moss in deep forests. I felt like a woman going to a state occasion, a signing of a treaty that would redefine the borders of my own life. At my lawyer's office, the documents were laid out on the large conference table, a formidable stack of paper that represented the final legal untangling of my life from my son's. "Mr. Jennings?" My lawyer asked me one last time, his voice gentle but firm. "Clara, are you absolutely certain this is the path you wish to take? Have you ever had to sign a piece of paper that felt both like a declaration of war and a declaration of love? It's a heavy pen to hold." I looked at him and nodded. "I am not just certain, Arthur," I said. "I am for the first time in many years completely at peace." I picked up the heavy, important feeling pen, and I began to sign. With each stroke of my name, I felt a weight lifting. I was not just signing away an inheritance. I was signing off on a lifetime of quiet, resentful obligation. I was revoking my consent to be undervalued. I was creating a new legacy, one based not on a bloodline, but on a principle. I walked out of Arthur Jennings' office into the bright afternoon sun. The papers were signed. The foundation in my husband's name was real. The trust for my grandchildren was secure. My son and his wife had been so terrified of losing a fortune. They never understood that a true inheritance is not a sum of money you are given, but a set of values you pass on. I had disinherited them from my wealth, yes, but in doing so, I was attempting to give their children a far greater gift, a lesson in what truly matters. Whether David and Jennifer would ever choose to learn, it was finally no longer my burden to carry. With the legal matter settled, a new kind of quiet entered my life. It was not the heavy, waiting silence of the weeks before, but a light, airy silence full of possibility. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the local community college, something I had wanted to do for 50 years but had never made time for. I found a surprising simple joy in the feel of the wet brush on thick paper, in the way the colors bled into one another, creating something new and unexpected. I was a beginner again at 70 years old, and it was a wonderful feeling. I was no longer defined by my past, by my role as a mother or a widow. I was simply a woman learning how to paint. The official notice from my lawyer was delivered to my son's house on a Tuesday. Mr. Jennings called to inform me. "The papers have been received, Clara," he said. I knew it was only a matter of time before the final confrontation. He came that evening. He didn't knock. I heard his key in the lock, a sound of old familiarity that now felt like an intrusion. He stood in my hallway holding the thick legal envelope, his face pale and drawn. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a deep, hollowed-out look of disbelief. Why was all he said, his voice barely a whisper? After everything, to cut me out completely. I did not invite him to sit. I did not offer him tea. I stood before him in my own home, and for the first time I did not feel the need to manage his feelings. This was never about cutting you out. "David?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was about deciding what I wanted to leave behind. What your father and I wanted our legacy to be. He shook his head, still not understanding. But it was our legacy, too. Mine. The children's. An inheritance is not a birthright, David, I told him. It is a responsibility. It is a continuation of a story. And the story your father and I wrote was about integrity, about quiet hard work, about kindness. The story you and Jennifer have been writing lately, it's a different book entirely. And it is not a book I am willing to add my final chapter to. It's the hardest thing a parent ever has to do, to choose between protecting their child from a painful truth and teaching them a necessary one. Have you ever been faced with such a choice? He had no answer to that. He just stood there, the legal papers trembling slightly in his hand. "So that's it," he said. "The foundation. The grandchildren's trust. It's all real." "It's the realest thing I've done in years," I replied. He left without another word. There was no anger left in him, only a vast, empty space where a future he had taken for granted used to be. I did not feel triumphant as I watched him go. I felt a deep, profound sorrow for the son I had lost, not to death, but to his own choices. But as I closed the door, I also felt a quiet strength. I had spent my life teaching children in a classroom. In the end, my hardest and most important lesson was the one I had to teach my own son. And the cost of that lesson had been everything. I closed the door, and for the first time, I did not feel his absence. I only felt the peaceful, steady presence of my own. A year has passed since the day I signed my new will. My life now is quiet, but it is not small. My watercolor class has become my weekly ritual, a place of simple, joyful creation. My small home is filled with light and books, and the comfortable, quiet presence of a woman who is finally at peace with herself. The foundation I established in my husband's name is thriving. I sit on its board, and once a month, I have the profound pleasure of reviewing applications for scholarships and community grants. I have taken the wealth that was once a source of family conflict and transformed it into a source of public good. My relationship with my grandchildren is a gentle, steady light. Their trust fund ensures their future is secure, a gift from their grandparents that is protected from the whims and mistakes of their parents. I receive letters from Lucy full of her teenage dramas and surprising insights. Her love is a clean, clear thing, unburdened by financial expectation. As for my son David, the silence between us has been replaced by a slow, cautious rebuilding. He sent a simple, unsigned card on my birthday this year. It was a small gesture, but it was a beginning. We are not the same as we were, but for the first time, our relationship is honest. Looking back on it all, my story feels like one of those difficult grandma true stories you hope you never have to live. A tale of being made to feel small and irrelevant by the people who should have held you closest. But I've learned that the most powerful grandma true stories aren't about the pain you endure. They're about the strength you find when you decide you will endure no more. That's a truth I see so often in the community at Granny Stories. We are all survivors of our own quiet battles, and there is such power in sharing those tales. Looking back on your own life, what is the one lesson you've learned that you wish you could share? Isn't it true that our hardest-won wisdom is our greatest treasure? My son thought my legacy was a number in a stock portfolio, but my true legacy is in the good work the foundation does and in my grandchildren's protected future. I think that's the real heart of so many grandma true stories, redefining what it means to leave something of value behind. I did not get the retirement party my son planned for me. Instead, I got something far better. I got my own life back. Thank you for being here with me on this journey. If my story about rewriting a will and a life has sparked a thought in you, I would be so honored if you would share your feelings or a piece of your own story in the comments below. Every story shared is a legacy in itself. If you know someone who needs a reminder that they are the author of their own final chapter, please feel free to share this story with them. And to join this wonderful library of shared wisdom, please consider subscribing to Granny Stories. Thank you for listening.